Some say that we have been languishing in the COVID-19 realities. As much as we are eager for borders to reopen, do we have the stamina to manage the uncertain demands of the new future? In light of the Mental Health Awareness Month in May, we work with positive psychology practitioner Tara Schofield to produce a 3-part series on resilience. Tara uses evidence-based positive psychology to design a toolkit that helps individuals prepare for economic recovery. In this episode, we look at how negative emotions can help us with building resilience. Tara, the first episode, we're going to talk around understanding how negative emotions help us with resilience. But to start off with, Tara, tell us, what is resilience?
Oh, hi, Al. I'm so glad you started with that question. Resilience, it's a term that we're hearing so much today, isn't it? You know, we're faced with all of this sort of uncertainty and all these big challenges, and we're told, be resilient. And that would be great if we knew what it meant practically to be resilient. Resilience is a term that really draws on a lot of different practices, daily habits, awareness and understanding of ourselves, and it's really quite complex. So when we're trying to do it, what does it look like for you? Effectively, from the research, we see that resilience is this idea of facing a challenge and then bouncing back from it. So it's really this ability to be able to bounce back after we've faced a set of challenging situations that really brings resilience alive. So it's not about not facing challenging situations or not being knocked by them. That can happen. But it's more about bouncing back that really brings resilience alive.
I think what I've learned through your lessons, as well as being very aware of my surroundings and my friends and the people that I talk to, we often have this saying, try to think positive, So, but I find it sometimes almost an impossible task until you sort of let on that say, hey, there are negative thoughts as well. So why how should we look at when it comes to negative emotion? How would negative emotions help us with resilience?
Oh, great question. Thanks, Al. And you're right. We often feel like, let's get into a positive mood state. And why not? Like feeling positive, thinking positive can feel really good for us. But you know what's really interesting? There's some really interesting research around being positive in hard situations. It's actually more draining on us and requires more effort and can be actually more damaging to us to try to put on a happy face when we're facing a really difficult set of circumstances than actually just genuinely feeling what the situation calls for. So, and I feel there's a lot to understand around negative emotions. There's a real lot to understand. So-called negative emotions, which is really hard to even use that term, are some of those big emotions that are really sometimes hard to feel. If you think about anger, you think about sadness, you think about fear. And often what's happening inside of us when we're feeling some of these emotions is there's a whole chemical cocktail going on, and it can be uncomfortable, it can be unpleasant. But negative emotions, just like positive emotions, are almost like sources of information. They're telling us how we feel and how we're making sense of a situation that we're in. If you feel like something has been a great injustice and you feel a flare of anger, that's pretty much a normal response to a difficult situation. So feeling some of those negative emotions when you're in a situation that calls for them is really being aligned to being aware of yourself. And that's a really great step towards resilience, is being aware of how we're feeling.
So what are some of the different thinking tracks that potentially could hold us back from challenging situations?
Oh, there's so many. And that's a really great question. And it's an important area of psychology. So I might backtrack a little bit. And what we notice is when people face really challenging or difficult situations, which we're seeing across the globe right now, right? What happens is we see when people are facing these situations, they may be navigating them in a way that may be helpful for them or not helpful for them to bounce back and be able to move forward. Now, one of the key areas that we notice when we really peel back from that is understanding a person's explanatory style. When they face this challenging situation, how are they explaining it to themselves? What are they saying? Are they facing it and going, I'm never going to cope. I'm never going to cope. Or are they going in and they're saying, okay, haven't been here before, what could I do? And you can imagine, like, there's so many different scenarios of what could we say in that difficult situation. Now, what we notice is there are a number of different so-called, as you said, like thinking traps, that sometimes they're called automatic negative thoughts, but there is almost like a theme to them that we see in psychology that can hold somebody back when they're facing a really challenging situation. And such thinking traps can be things such as mislabeling. So seeing a situation but actually calling it, an example of mislabeling might be going into a situation and saying, oh, I'll never cope with this, or oh, I've never been able to add up, I've never been able to do that. And you're sort of mislabeling the situation. Another thinking trap could be over catastrophizing. And we all can do this. And I put my hand up to say, I've been known to catastrophize before. But what happens with catastrophizing is a challenging situation happens. And rather than dealing with it in the situation and sort of thinking, okay, this is this situation, how do I handle this? We can over-catastrophize and think, this has happened and this is the likely result. And before you know it, you've kind of jumped from this situation to almost the worst case scenario. And that can be habit forming. So every time you face a challenging situation, you go from that situation to kind of worst case scenario. And it can be really depleting to resilience. So that's kind of how thinking traps work.
I completely hear you and support that thought process, because I think reflecting on last year when COVID first happened and we lost like a lot of money, I remember having so much negative thoughts, because every time when I log into the bank account and you see a big fat zero, if not negative, I just go, wow. But as I started to find the courage to look at it, to really stare at the number or the lack of numbers, my fear doesn't change the number. I have to sort of like embrace that, you know what, yes, of course there is fear, how I'm gonna pay the next bill, how I'm gonna pay my team's salary, but it really spurred me on to doing something so that I can close the gap between having no money to paying my suppliers, my partners, and my team members.
You've touched on something really, really important there, Al, in that by saying you knew you couldn't control one thing. The money in that bank balance was out of your control at that time. So it was something that at that point you couldn't do anything about, but what you could control was your reaction to it. And I think you've touched on to the heart of what resilience is about, is recognizing firstly what you're feeling, and then being able to say, well, what do I have control over here? And we do have, once we learn the skills and the strategies, we do have an element of control about how we respond to a situation. That was a great example.
Thank you. And I also find that, through what I learned from you, is that, once if I were to achieve certain level of resilience, it's like going to the gym. I have to maintain it. It doesn't stay at that level. There are certain things that will test our resilience that could bring it lower, and then we have to work just a little bit harder to bring it back up. And I find that getting comfortable with knowing that, and the awareness of having and experiencing negative emotions, and take them as just information source that reflect that we are only human, would perhaps transition us to more positive actions about making a change.
Yeah, and what we know about resilience, or what we're seeing in the research, is resilience is learnable, and that's what you're touching on there. It's buildable. We're all facing daily situations where we call on our resilience. We're maybe running late, we have to make a decision about something, or something bigger than that as well. And so resilience is something that really the research suggests, try to build it in the good times when you don't really need it, having some of those positive habits in place that you can call on, so that in the harder times, you've so-called got that muscle, like you're talking about, that fitness level available and ready for you. Not waiting until, the rug literally gets pulled out from under your feet and thinking, well, what do I do? But more being prepared, and it's learnable and buildable. As you've said, it's something that when we face challenging situations, we have to call on more resources. So we may face, daily life may require us to call on, our strengths and our ability to be resourceful. But in fact, when something really big happens, where we're really in a threatening situation or a really difficult situation, we might need to go beyond our regular go-tos and maybe go wider out to our social network, our social supports. We may need to tap into some other sources that can support us with our resilience. But knowing that they're available can be a great way to access them in hard times.
Tara, share with us, why is it important that we face our negative emotions and not suppressing them?
I want to give you an example the other way around. Have you, Elle, ever been in a situation, and I bet you have, where you have where you have not been allowed to laugh? So you've been in a situation where you and another person have seen each other and you're not allowed to laugh, but something is making you laugh, and feel the energy of that laugh. It kind of builds and it holds in you, right? And it's sort of like, how do I let this out? Yeah. So think about and when you try to hold it down and dampen it down, it gets so big it almost lives all through you. And they're kind of some of life's most fun experiences in a way. Now let's think of the flip side. You're in a situation where something's really hard and you're trying to dampen it down and suppress it down and not allow it any expression. The same sort of energy builds up. It kind of builds up inside of us as well. And what we're seeing from a lot of different types of research is just being able to respond to a situation. Now, I want to just caveat this by saying, I'm not saying to go out and shout at your boss or anything like that, but I'm also saying allow an expression of that emotion. It allows it almost to tail out and not build up and hold inside of you and deplete you in other ways as well. So it's being able to express the real situation, the real reactions that are building up inside of us is actually healthier for us in the long term, so they don't build up.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your advice, Tara, and we can't wait to the next episode where we talk about doubt.
Thank you. Thanks. Looking forward to it.